Every spring, as the sun begins to shine longer each day and the soil starts to dry out and warm up, there's renewed enthusiasm for growing vegetables and harvesting them to eat fresh from our own gardens. Hello, I'm Stan Smith from Ohio State University Extension in Fairfield County. Frequently, we receive calls from home gardeners in mid to late summer who have vegetable gardens that simply haven't turned out as they had hoped. Many times their frustrations result from too many vegetables that their family simply doesn't enjoy eating, or not enough of the ones they like the most. We find that if the gardener had simply taken a little more time early in the year to plan more closely exactly what it was they might harvest from their garden for their families, they would be having a more enjoyable experience as harvest time progresses throughout the summer and the fall. Whether you're just now ordering your seeds or have already begun to plant, this 10-minute presentation by OSU Extension educator Rory Lewandowski will help you make the most of this year's vegetable gardening experience.
Okay, so we get into planting the garden. And when you look at those steps, it's, well, what vegetables do you actually like? There's a lot of things that will grow, but do you like everything? Rich Thompson, again, I don't know if you mentioned this, but I've been out to Rich's place before, and I remember one of the first times I was visiting Rich, I said, well, I don't see any eggplant here. And Rich said, well, I don't like eggplant, so I don't grow it. So he might have, even though it was just one of those things, he just felt strongly enough that he didn't really like eggplant and he didn't grow it. And it does have some problems with flea beetles as well, so he determined from that it wasn't worth his effort on growing it. The same thing, like right now, radishes are an easy crop to grow. I mean, they'll grow without much work. They're a quick crop, but so you could grow them in your garden. But if you don't like a lot of radishes, there's no sense in growing them. So when you're planting the garden, what vegetables do you like? And then it goes back to the next consideration. Well, how much sunlight do I have? And again, if you're going to grow some of those things like sweet corn, or you want to grow tomatoes and peppers, our warm season crops tend to need more sunlight. They like that closer to 10 hours of sunlight a day or more. So what kind of sunlight do you have? Then pollination requirements. Sweet corn is probably, again, a good example of this. Rather than planting one long row, we have to plant sweet corn in blocks to get good pollination on it. So rather than planting a couple long rows of sweet corn, we would say we'll plant 4 to 6 at least to get good, adequate pollination. Shorter block, planted in blocks. So, are you able to do that? And then the timing. We have cool season vegetables, we have warm season vegetables. What's your schedule like? Do you have maybe more time later in the summer? So planting now at this time of the year isn't going to work out for you. You'd rather work on planting a garden that focuses more on warm season vegetables. Or you have more time now, maybe where the cool season works out for you. Later in the summer, you don't want to really worry about gardening as much, so you're going to kind of have a cool season garden and not really worry about that later summer, hot period of summer. So, what kind of timing? Or maybe you like to garden through that whole period and then come back in the fall even with another cool season crop. So timing is something that has to be considered. So planting the garden. How much space does a mature vegetable plant need? I had a guy that came into my office a few years ago, and he was just tremendously excited. It was early spring, and he said, I can't believe how many vegetables I have been able to get into this little garden space. He said, I've got like 30 tomato plants, and he said, I'm not probably taking up any more room than about this table. He goes, it's just incredible with the amount of stuff I'm going to be able to grow. Well, it looked good at that point, but later on in the season, those mature plants grow quite a bit, and he had a mess later on in the year, and I saw him later, and he said, yeah, that didn't work out as well. I couldn't even harvest. He got into a lot of disease problems. He couldn't walk through and get at things. It created that microenvironment where plants never really dried out, didn't get good wind movement, so it was a mess. So think about how much space does the mature vegetable plant need. And then if you've got space in between, if it seems like a terrible waste of space, you could plant a short season crop in between. You could go with something like maybe, again, a quick crop of radishes, even some lettuce that might come out, and then you just sacrifice it as, get a little bit off of it, and then as those crops grow together, you lose it. So if you can't bear to see that bare space, you could fill it in with a shorter season crop in between. But think about that mature vegetable plant, how much room. Squash or a pumpkin plant is going to take a lot of room. How much do you expect to harvest from that? Do you need 30 tomato plants? how many tomatoes is that going to yield? You know, how many zucchini plants do you need? Do you need a dozen zucchini plants? You know, how much sweet corn do you need? So think about, well, again, it's easy to get excited about planting early in the year, but what kind of harvest can you expect? How much quantity are you going to get out of that? And then can you use it in a timely manner? If I plant a lot of green beans, you're probably going to have to be out there picking to keep up with them, you know, every day, every other day. Is that something you want to do? Are you going to be able to handle that in a timely manner? When do those vegetables need to be planted in? What time of the year? What kind of planting dates? You want cool season vegetables that would go in this time of the year. Warm season vegetables. Or, you know, are you going to aim at maybe a fall garden where you go back in and plant some of those cool season vegetables late summer, and so over the fall when it's cooling down, you're back into that cycle as well. I did give you a handout. You can take a look at that. That kind of goes through and answers some of these questions. It's called Planning for the Garden. I just had it retyped. It's from an out-of-print OSU publication. Was Bulletin, used to be Bulletin 287, but had some of these pages retyped up, and it goes through kind of some of the things we've talked about. The location of the garden, type of soils, what size of garden do you want to have, the arrangement of the garden. There's a section in there on succession and companion planting. And I did also give you a handout on companion planting as well that talks about plants that do very well together, plants that you want to avoid planting together. There's a good book here. This one's called Carrots Love Tomatoes. This whole book is about plants that do well together that you can plant together on companion planting. So there's a handout on that. I also gave you a handout on plant families so that you know if you're going to do a rotation, which families are related. Like, for example, potatoes and tomatoes are related. They're in the same family. So if you're trying to, they will share some of the same diseases. So if you're going to try to rotate out of an area to get away from disease, you plant tomatoes one year, come back in with potatoes, that's not going to help you out. You want to probably group those together and then move them into a separate area. Okay, also in this, back to that first handout on planting the garden, it does talk about a fall garden. There's a sheet in there, and then they've got some really good tables. Table 1 is vegetables seeded directly in the garden. It gives you the timing of generally when to plant those vegetables. It'll tell you the depth that you can plant those vegetables at. It'll tell you how many seeds per 100 feet, roughly days to maturity, your planting distance in inches in the row, and then between the rows as well. And then, this is kind of useful, your estimated yield per 100 feet of row. So it answers that question, well, how many plants do I need? What can I expect? You know, what do I need for my situation? That will give you a little bit of an example of the yield to expect, you know, barring any tragedy, of course. Then they've got a chart in there also on transplants and when those could get put in. So it's got the cool and warm season vegetables as well. They've got a chart in there as well as on some of the canning needs, vegetable needs for family members, frozen and canning, and then again a schedule for vegetables started from plants, when to start them, when to move them into a cold frame to harden them off, when to plant them in the garden. So this is really a nice handout. Gives you some very useful charts. I know that the last couple of weeks the folks have been working, Master Gardeners at the Farmers Market have had this handout available, and they've been using this. People ask, well, when should I plant this? You know, how deep do I plant these seeds? Or, you know, what kind of yield might I expect? Those are the kind of questions you might get, and so it's a real useful handout to be able to use. So then as you continue to plan your garden, think about, well, are there disease or insect problems that I need to watch out for? And again, we covered some of this when we talked about our plant pathology unit, but some of the common diseases, and we'll review some of these at the end of this section, or insects that we need to watch out for. With potatoes, of course, the Colorado potato beetle is always one that people need to be thinking about. There's some other ones with warm season vegetables. With our cool season, you get into cabbages, and some of the cabbage loopers can be pretty devastating if you're not keeping track of what's going on with your cabbage. You just plant them and walk away. You might come back and find out that they've been eaten up by these cabbage loopers. So you've got to be aware of what potential problems are out there. And again, it comes back to when we talked about the integrated pest management, taking a look at your plants. You know, don't just plant them and walk away. Monitor your plants. keep track of what's going on out there in the garden. And then how much time do you have? Once again, it's easy to get excited about gardening early in the spring, lots of energy, new year, we're coming out of a long winter, and it's nice to see green growing things, but how much time are you going to have then again later in the summer to do the care of the garden, the maintenance of the garden, and again, if you have a lot of produce, to do the canning or freezing or whatever you need to preserve those products.